Hello, everybody, and welcome to my channel, Caleb Thinks a Lot. I want to do a video about the virtues of debate and what I think is required prior to a debate in terms of like seeking what is true and false. And I've come to kind of 5 core virtues, I would say, required in a person who wants to engage in honest debates, not as just a game or an intellectual battle, but as an actual method for helping you determine what is true and false in your life and what belief system to adopt. The first virtue that I want to talk about is congruency. And this is actually something that I got from Carl Rogers, a psychologist. And basically, what it is embodied speech as opposed to disembodied speech. So what does that mean? Disembodied speech is something that we do a lot here in the West as a Western culture because we over-rationalize and intellectualize everything to the point of detaching our emotions, our feelings, and our actual experiences from our words. So we will have a system in our mind about what is true or false, but that system is going to be discongruent with our actual emotions and speech. And so this may seem kind of like a weird thing to bring up in the context of a debate because debate is usually seen as an intellectual activity. However, if the debate is going to mean anything at all in your life, then it has to be connected to your intuitions, to your feelings, and to the way that you're expressing your life. If you don't have congruency in a debate, then it is merely going to boil down to an intellectual game. And ultimately, it's going to mean nothing about what you end up doing or not doing in your life. It's also going to take the wisdom out of debate because wisdom is knowledge when it's applied. And when you're not actually connecting your knowledge to your actions, to your emotions, and to the lower parts of yourself, then it's just going to be, like I said, a game, a mental game that's played out in your head. And this relates to the next virtue that I want to talk about, which is authenticity. And this is very similar, and it's not so much about speaking while embodying your emotions and your feelings, but it's actually about a slightly related but different experience I had when I started to go on a seeking journey, which is that I would be saying something or I'd be in a conversation or discussion or kind of debate or challenge-oriented conversation with somebody in my life, and there would be experiences that would bubble up that would actually contradict the very thing I was saying. And I think another virtue is an authentic doubt or expression where when they do bubble up and contradict the very thing you're saying, you actually stop yourself from speaking and say, well, actually, I had this experience, though, that kind of, contradicts what I was just telling you. And so that gets you into a state of not knowing rather than knowing. And having the humility, which, by the way, is a virtue I'll talk about last, having the humility to openly admit that in a discussion and making that a daily practice of authentic speech and authentic expression is, in the long run, going to, again, help you in debate because it's going to require that whatever belief system you adopt is not merely coherent as a system or intellectual system, but is actually coherent, that it actually explains your memories, your life experiences. So it's going to be empirical in its explanation of your life and not merely an ideological rational system that's coherent in and of itself, but doesn't actually explain anything in your life. And speaking of coherency and consistency, that is actually the next thing that I'm going to talk about, because at the end of the day, your feelings, your intuitions, your lived experience is not enough for determining what is true and false, because it's going to, in the end, have to make sense on an intellectual level. Because of what is called the law of identity and the law of non-contradiction and the law of excluded middle, which is a truth that everybody knows intuitively, actually, but may not know that it's actually formalized as laws of logic. So the truth is basically, to put it simply, if you walk into the kitchen and you open the fridge, let's say there's a milk carton in there. The milk carton can't both be in there and not in there at the same time. Now, I know that sounds like kind of silly to talk about such a basic thing everyone knows. But if somebody tries to tell you, oh yeah, the milk is in the fridge and not in the fridge at the same time, you're going to look at them and be like, you're ridiculous. No, the milk is either there or not there. This is called the law of identity, which is that the milk has an identity that can't contradict itself. And the milk has a mode of either being in the fridge or not in the fridge, right? And there's no middle ground. There's no half milk carton, unless, of course, the identity of that object is a half milk carton. Then it could be either in or not in the fridge. But the point is that when it comes to debate, we all know and believe that things need to make sense, have coherence, logical coherence to them. And contradictions are real reasons to reject beliefs. And this is going to come down to the virtue then of being logically consistent, which is not as easy as it may sound, because it's going to imply catching yourself and other people, but first and foremost yourself, if you care about what's true and false. It's going to imply catching yourself on logical fallacies, such as the fallacy of believing things based on authority. So there's a fallacy of, just because authoritative person says A, that is not a good enough reason to compel somebody to believe it, because the authority figure could be wrong. But this is a common fallacy people make of, oh, well, my institution, my science institution told me this. Whatever. Okay, but that's not a compelling reason. That's not actually a explanation for how you know that assertion is true or false. That's why it's a fallacy. The fallacy of consensus, which is, well, everybody believes such and such. So that's not a valid reason to say whether it's true and false. Everybody knows that, yada, yada, yada. Okay, but that's not, again, an epistemic justification or an explanation for how you know that thing is true. Because, there's tons of people that believe in ghosts. Does that then mean that we're all going to believe in ghosts now because the majority of people believe in ghosts, right? So these logical fallacies, and there's many more than just these, and you can look up, there's websites that detail out all these logical fallacies. I think there's a Wikipedia page on logical fallacies, and they're based on these laws of logic and the laws of thought, which is another term. And applying yourself to catching yourself whenever you're making a logical fallacy takes practice and time and a study of the logical fallacies, and of watching many debates and stuff and seeing people being caught or either not caught in these logical fallacies. And so you have to learn to recognize these in yourself. And ultimately, the coherency and consistency that comes from having logical beliefs is going to lead you into a belief system that makes way more sense than what you previously believed. And so then that comes to integrity, actually, which is, if you find yourself in a debate, what does integrity mean in this context? There's different senses of the word integrity, but I'm actually talking about a specific thing that can happen in a debate where your pride actually and your ego gets in the way of admitting when you've made a mistake in a debate, when you've made an invalid move of thought or an invalid justification or invalid or a logical fallacy in a conversation. Because it takes integrity to basically admit, no, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. I retract that statement and I admit defeat. I will give you that point in that is not a valid reason to accept what I'm saying. So integrity is a step further from consistency because it's not just merely the intellectual recognizing of logical fallacies, but it's actually the embodied admission that you were incorrect during a debate. And it's the embodied admission when you make a mistake that you are defeated on that point and that you need to admit you're wrong and move on. So this is something that you have to practice again, and it's something that doesn't come naturally to us as human beings. But over time, when we learn to recognize the fallacies, we're going to start recognizing when we're making mistakes. We'll start seeing when we get angry or zealous, overzealous or prideful during a debate. And what we'll need to do is basically have the integrity to admit that we're wrong. And the more that we do that, the more we're going to move away from false beliefs, right? The whole point of debate is to move away from what is false and move toward what is true, right? And so we're going to move away from false beliefs through continually admitting when we're wrong and when we don't actually have a valid reason to believe what we believe. So the last thing is related. Again, it comes down to the trait of humility. And when it comes to humility, it's related to this idea of integrity as well. And it's actually necessary. It's kind of the key anchoring virtue for all the other virtues I've talked about at this point. Because it requires humility to speak from your heart and to speak from your lived experiences. Because those things are not as flashy and as cool as having arguments. So it requires humility and a desire to make sense of your world over the desire to impress other people, to have authenticity and congruency, right? Because authenticity and congruency, my experience with those virtues is you're always putting your foot in your mouth. You're basically like, you may be in an argument, you may be saying something like, in the middle of making an argument, and then something comes up in your mind, an experience you've had that contradicts literally the very thing you were just arguing for. And it takes humility to stop yourself and to say, wait a minute, I've actually had experiences, evidence in my life contradict the very thing I'm saying. So I'm unwarranted. I'm not being consistent with myself. So sorry that I was just arguing for something that doesn't actually make sense of my life, right? And it also, again, humility comes to logical consistency. You have to have the admission and recognition and perception when you have made a mistake, right? And something that's really helped me with this question of humility, and nobody's going to be perfect in this regard, but is the recognition of what pride actually is. So pride is the desire to be esteemed from other people. That's one of the aspects of pride. It's not just being overconfident. You can actually feign a kind of underconfidence and false humility, and that can actually come from a place of pride because you're virtue signaling your false humility to be esteemed from other people. And so pride is actually the desire to want other people to like you, to see you as somebody to look up to. And if you can recognize when you're desiring and when you're speaking out of the mode of pride more and more, then that is going to give you humility over time. So recognizing, oh, am I saying this because it's genuine and authentic expression from my heart? Or am I saying this because I know it appeals to the people around me and it's going to win me virtue points? That is the final virtue of debate. And I think all of these virtues kind of come together, hopefully, through practice and an economy that is going to give you way more insight and is going to give you much better experiences with the active debate, because it's no longer this intellectual game. It's no longer a pride battle, an ego battle, but it's actually an authentic seeking of what is true and false, which I think is the true meaning and the true essence of traditional debate, which we have lost in our current culture. And it's sad to see a culture go that direction, but that's definitely the direction that our culture is going in. But there is a small minority of people who are rebelling against that, and they're actually finding traditional debate and old debates online, and they're using the internet to facilitate traditional, organized, thoughtful debate that has these virtues of humility, admitting defeat, has these virtues of an honest seeking of what is true and false rather than an intellectual game, has these virtues of humility and not pride battles and ego battles and being overzealous for your team or that team. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you have any thoughts or experiences you'd like to share in the comments below, be sure to do that. Be sure to share this video with people who are like-minded. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.